Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to welcome you at the third day of our symposium, History of the Lvov-Warsaw School. Today we finally moved from logic to philosophy, and our session is entitled History of the Lvov-Warsaw School. And it's my also honor and pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Professor Venanzio from University of Urbino. The title of his lecture is Meinong and Twardowski on representations and judgments.
Okay, I thank very much Anna and the organizer of this conference, and I am very happy to stay here and to discuss philosophy with you. Meinong's and Twardowski's writings present a terminological and conceptual familiarity. Many scholars regard zur Lehre von Inhalt und Gegenstand der Vorstellungen as a link between Brentano's descriptive psychology and Meinong's object theory. But I will not deal with this issue. The correspondence between Meinong and Twardowski, which extends from 1893 to 1916, displays that they mainly discuss issues concerning representations and judgments. I will focus on this topic, the judgment and its content, and then conceptual representations and represented judgments.
Also, the slides are not changing from Zoom participants, so we have to do something with that. Perhaps this way, is it okay? So for these technical inconveniences, perhaps we will try once again.
Okay.
Let's try this way. Yes, no, it should be. Okay. Now it's working here and there.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
Okay, the relationship between the Meinong and Twardowski began with Twardowski sending to Meinong in December 1893 of a copy of Zur Lehre. In thanking him, Meinong states that he has found in the book many interesting things. A few years later, on June 11, 1897, Twardowski writes to Meinong that he is working on a theory of judgment whose main idea is the distinction between act, content, and object. In his reply, Meinong says that he has read many useful things in Zur Lehre, has also found elements to criticize, and has toyed with the idea of reviewing the book for the Göttingische Gelehrte Anzeigen, which he did not do. In his letter of July 25, 1897, Twardowski regrets that Meinong did not review Zur Lehre and affirms that now he would write some things differently, others he would not write at all. But his statement does not mean a disavowal of all the results achieved in his work. To understand what Meinong found interesting and what to criticize in Zur Lehre, we need to open this book. In paragraph 2, Twardowski understands the act of judging as analogous to that of representing. Only if the object can be represented in a modifying sense, it can also be judged, and only in this sense the object is present in the judgment. And just as in a representation one has, in addition to the object represented by it, the object represented in it, that is the content, so also in the judgment appears next to the object to which it refers, the content. Since to affirm or deny means to state the existence or not of the object on which the judgment is concerned, then, concludes Twardowski, the content of a judgment is the existence or non-existence of the object with which every judgment is concerned. But what is really judged, he specifies, is the object itself, which is judged by means of the content, which mediates between the mental act and the object. An analogy is thus established between the two kinds of mental states. In both, there is a mental act representing or judging. Both refer to an object which is presumed to be independent of thinking. In both cases, there occurs a third thing besides the mental act and its object, which is, as it were, a sign of the object, its mental picture when it is represented, and its existence when it is judged. Twardowski distinguishes the content of a representation from the content of a judgment, which identifies with the existence of the object. However, it does not explain in what sense the existence of the object corresponds to the immanent object which he identifies with content. Moreover, it is not clear whether existence, being the content mental, is in turn mental. If it is not, then the analogy between the two kinds of mental states is broken, since only the content of a representation is mental, not that of a judgment, that is, the existence of the object. Moreover, like Brentano, Twardowski does not yet distinguish a specific object of a judgment from that of a representation, but considers that they refer to the same object. This results from several passages of Zur Lehre. In the aforementioned letter to Meinong of July 11, 1897, Twardowski shows that he has changed his mind on two points just mentioned. He writes, in each judgment must be distinguished act, affirmation or denial, content, existing, being, present, subsisting, object, the judged state of affairs, that is either an absolute datum or a relation, or both together. Example, God exists, object God, content existence, act affirmation. Or 2 times 2 are 4, object equality between the product of 2 times 2 are 4, content the existence, subsistence of this equality, act affirmation. Therefore, the content can also consist in subsisting, not only in existing, and the object is no longer the object of a representation, but it is the state of affairs, the Sachverhalt. The elements we draw from this letter are neither. More indications come from the manuscript of the logic lessons that Twardowski gave at the University of Vienna in the winter semester 1894-95. Compared to the Habilitationsschrift, there are substantial confirmation and novelties. The first novelty related to the content of a judgment arises from the consideration of a kind of non-existing objects not examined in zur Lehre, the past objects which existed but no longer exist. If the proposition "one was a king" is true, then it affirms the existence of someone who no longer exists, which is contradictory. Therefore, the content of a judgment is not always the existence in the proper sense, but also the subsisting of a relation, regardless of whether the members of the relation itself exist. Twardowski regards the existential proposition as the fundamental form of judgment, but he denies that all judgments are existential. Precisely on the basis of the previous argument relating to the past objects. Near existential judgment, he places judgments on a relation mentioned fleetingly in zur Lehre, which are not reducible to the former, but constitute a specific class. In the case of an existential judgment, the content consists, as in zur Lehre, in the existence of the object. In the case of a judgment on a relation, the content consists instead in the subsistence of the relation, regardless of whether its member exists or not. In this way, Twardowski distances himself from Brentano and renews from the foundation the theory of judgment of the teacher. The second element of novelty concerns the object. The object of an existential judgment is still the same object of a representation, while that of a judgment on a relation is a different object. Since each relation has at least 2 elements, the corresponding object will always be composed. On the contrary, that of an existential judgment can also be non-analyzed. That is, it can be an individual. Moreover, a relation can also subsist between non-existing component parts. Even though in the logic Twardowski does not use the term Sachverhalt, he nevertheless means this by the object of a judgment on a relation. And also on another point, the logic integrates what is only mentioned in the zur Lehre. In discussing Benno Erdmann's theory of judgment, which speaks of intermediate forms between representations and the judgment, Twardowski introduces the represented judgment. A represented judgment in which represented as a modifying function is not a genuine judgment that is asserted with a claim to truth. However, it has a propositional character, which instead representations do not possess. Therefore, Twardowski introduces an intermediate form between a representation and the judgment, which, as we will see at the end of my talk, has strong affinities with Meinong's assumptions. From Übergegenstände höherer Ordnung und deren Verhältnis zur inneren Wahrnehmung zu überemotionale Präsentation. Meinong will reflect and refine his ideas about the distinction between content and object, object of a representation and object of a judgment. His perspective is close to that of Twardowski. Meinong deals with judgments on a relation which are not reducible to existential judgments in his review of Pinoian Theorien der kategorischen Schlüsse by Franz Hillebrand. On this issue, the two philosophers independently arrive at similar results. Meinong recognizes the essential contribution given by Twardowski to object theory. However, in his writings, he rarely mentions him, and the few quotations always concern the question of content and object, about which he never undertakes an effective discussion with Twardowski. Then let's go back to the initial questions. What are the many useful things that Meinong did find in Zur Lehre, and what are the theses that he criticizes? As many scholars have shown, Meinong shares the two main arguments put forward by Twardowski to prove the validity of the distinction between content and object. The content exists if the object does not exist. The object of a representation has properties that cannot in any way relate to the content. As for Twardowski, also for Meinong, the object is the referent of our mental states and is independent of being known. Equally, it is the summum genus. The greatest disagreement concerns the content. According to Twardowski, the content does form together with act one single mental reality, but unlike the act, it is never real. Like Twardowski, Meinong distinguishes between reality and existence, but defines the real as what can exist. Therefore, what exists is also real, and the content, like the act, exists, is real and present. It is also mental. Moreover, Meinong refuses to equate immanent object and the content of a representation as Twardowski does. He believes, unlike Twardowski, that it is not always possible to distinguish clearly between content and object. This is easy in cases where the former is mental and the latter is physical, but there are other cases when the object to be apprehended is in a mental state, in which there occurs a quasi-content and the two can be similar under the point, the limit point of identity. Twardowski's thesis, according to which the content of a judgment is the existence of the object or the subsistence of a relation, does not meet Meinong's favors. Meinong's reflection on the content of an object are scattered throughout several writings. But also for Meinong, it's not easy to say what content of an object properly is. And the origin of this difficulty lies in the perspective assumed, but because, like Twardowski, Meinong treats the content of a judgment from a psychological, not a semantic point of view. From a psychological point of view, it is actually difficult to distinguish mental state and its content, since they are both mental. Meinong makes a real progress in the conception of the content in Überemotionale Präsentation, where he proposes two arguments. If I represent the blue of the sky and the green of a meadow, the two states that apprehend them are in many ways similar, both being perceptual representations. What necessarily makes them different so that they can refer to two different objects are their respective contents. From the diversity of the objects, we deduce the diversity of the contents. This is the second argument. Consider two representations, a conceptual representation and a fantasy representation of the same object, for example, of the tone C. The former is the result of the perception of the tone, the latter of the memory of it. In the second case, the tone is not exactly the same as in the other case, because the pitch will not remain absolutely exact. However, whether I perceive the tone or I remember it, the object apprehended by means of such representations remain the same. If the object is the same, so will be the content, while the variation will affect the act. Both arguments are about representation, but applying them to judgment, even these present the same analogy, the same duplicity of act and content. As previously, the representation of blue was distinguished from the representation of green by means of the content, the same holds for a judgment that apprehends the being compared to another that apprehends the non-being. Moreover, the same state of affairs can be apprehended by both a judgment and an assumption, which are two different mental states, and the judgment is characterized by degrees of certainty or uncertainty that concern the act, but in no way the content of the object. Meinong then comes to the following general definition of content. The content is that part of an experience, an alertness, which is so coordinated with the object to be apprehended by the experience, more precisely with the object immediately presented by the latter, that it varies or remains constant with the object. Now I come to the second part of my talk about conceptual representation and represented judgment. On 1st May 1898, Twardowski informed Meinong that he has sent him separately a recent publication, Wyobrażenia I pojęcia. In this work, Twardowski aims to answer a problem raised by Meinong about intuitive and non-intuitive representations, and deals with two of his writings, Junge Studienzweig and especially Fantasievorstellung und Fantasie. Being written in Polish, Meinong cannot read the book as Twardowski himself fears. But 4 years later, on November 18, 1902, Twardowski gave a lecture at the Philosophical Society of the University of Vienna entitled Über begriffliche Vorstellungen, in which he briefly set out the content of that book. On January 17, 1903, Meinong sent Twardowski a letter, unfortunately lost, praising that lecture as proved by Twardowski's reply. In Über begriffliche Vorstellungen, Twardowski presents the distinction between intuitive and non-intuitive representations as a shared acquisition. It is a fact that some things, like a house, a tree, a triangle, can be represented intuitively, while others cannot be represented intuitively, either by their nature, God, atoms, or because they exceed the threshold of our representational capacity. I can intuitively represent a pentagon, not a heliagon. But, asks Twardowski, how comes this non-intuitive representing about? How can it be described? And he finds the answer to these questions, or at least the indication of the direction in which to look for an answer, in Meinong's essay, Fantasievorstellung und Fantasie. This essay must have seemed particularly sympathetic to Twardowski because Meinong applies the method of conceptual analysis. Meinong believes that one can speak of intuition only in coincidence with perceiving, or at least with possibility of perceiving. But he does not identify intuition and perception because in perceiving is present as its constituent part a judgment which instead is absent in intuition. Intuition, Meinong writes, is the perceptual representation underlying a real or possible perceptual judgment. However, Meinong refuses to identify, as might seem obvious, what is intuitive with the concrete, because the intuitive can also be the result of abstraction by means of attention. To illustrate this distinction, Meinong uses an example. During a conversation, one speaks of a red chalkboard. The listener has so far seen only blackboards, so the expression red chalkboard should induce him to produce a new formation whose components are determined by the words chalkboard and red. Let's say that in the listener, the word red recalls the representation of a red sphere and the word chalkboard that of a blackboard. He understands that the color of the sphere belongs to the chalkboard and combines the two abstract terms, red and chalkboard, in a complexion. But since a red sphere and a blackboard do not constitute a red chalkboard, the listener does not arrive at an intuitive representation of the red board. To reach this, the substrate for the abstract representation red would have to be not the sphere, but a rectangular surface with the size of a chalkboard. In the latter case, the conjunction between chalkboard and red is more intimate than in the other. In the first case, the conjunction of the representation is only indicated. In the second, it is realized. The achievement of an intuitive result depends on the descriptive heart of the speaker, but also on the skills of the perceiving subject who could be content with a non-intuitive understanding of linguistic expressions. That is, that the activity of the subject is decisive in order to arrive to a non-intuitive representation. The transition from non-intuitive to intuitive is not always possible. A first limit is the law of the threshold. Concepts concerning something too small or too large cannot be made intuitive, but even more obvious is the case of a representation of incompatible elements, such as a round square. According to Twardowski, in Fantasievorstellung und Fantasie, Meinong helps to understand the nature of non-intuitive representations. And Twardowski's argument starts from Meinong's example of the red chalkboard, to which he adds two more examples. In the first example, he imagines having to decide whether the elliptical lawn in front of the house would look better if it had a pentagonal shape. I can obtain an intuitive representation of the pentagonal lawn under the following conditions. I represent the lawn as an ellipse. I evoke in myself the intuitive representation of a pentagon, and I make myself aware that the lawn must possess not the shape of an ellipse, but that of a pentagon, which I represented to myself. At this point, when I concentrate hard on this thought, the elliptical shape gives way to the pentagonal shape, and I obtain an intuitive representation of the pentagonal lawn. The expression "when I concentrate hard on this thought" means to emphasize the activity of the subject, who, without such an effort, would not achieve the same result. On the other hand, such an effort does not always succeed. If I would represent something with incompatible properties, for example, alone at the same time elliptical and square, I would not be able in any case to obtain, as Meinong claimed, an intuitive representation. In the case that there is an incompatibility between properties, the conjunction is not realized but only indicated. However, even this last conjunction, says Twardowski with Meinong, is a conjunction. It is only indicated from the perspective of the anticipated intuitiveness, but it is realized in the meaning, the mental correlate of the words, a simultaneous elliptical and square law, while the intuitive conjunctions of the red bar is realized in the mental picture. Within this discussion, we find the represented judgments which have strong affinities with Meinong's assumptions, as Twardowski himself acknowledges. Assumptions are a kind of intermediate state between representations and judgments. Unlike representations, judgments are active states. They are formulated with conviction or with a claim to truth, and they possess the character of the position, that is, they are affirmative or negative. Assumptions are also active states which possess the character of position, but are formulated without claim to truth, that is, they are judgments without conviction. We use assumption in many fields, in games, lies, hypothetical reasonings, and we use them in understanding. We often understand a proposition without granting our consent, that is, we do not believe that that proposition is true. Understanding does not require conviction, but mere assumption. Twardowski presupposes a semiotic context in which an individual hears or reads the description of an unknown perceptual object. To represent it, he must understand the statements that describe the object at issue. Just as understanding a name means evoking oneself the corresponding mental content, that is, the representation designated by that term, so understanding a statement could mean evoking the mental judgment that constitutes the meaning of the linguistic statements. This happens often, but not always, because we often understand the statements, but we are simply not in a position to pass the respective judgment, be it because we have doubts about its correctness or because we are convinced of its falsity. In these cases, says Twardowski, we do not make a judgment, but represent it. As for Meinong, an essential characteristic of judgment for Twardowski is conviction, that is, the claim to trust. Thus, when reading a description and forming for ourselves on its basis a representation of the described object, we also harbor within ourselves, in addition to the substrate representation which comprises the point of departure for every description, representations of judgment or represented judgment. To understand the description, judgments are not necessary, but represented judgment are sufficient. This also applies to the above examples of red chalkboard, etc. When the listener in Meinong's example understands that the red color of the sphere belongs to the chalkboard and combines the two abstract terms, red and chalkboard, it does nothing but represent the judgment expressed by the assertion the chalkboard is red. Likewise, to represent the law that is, and I know to be elliptical as pentagonal, I do not formulate a real judgment, but a represented judgment. I tell myself in the thought that law must have a pentagonal shape. Thus, Twardowski arrives at the following definition of a non-intuitive or conceptual representation. That representation of an object which is composed of a substrate representation of an object that is similar to the object at issue and of representation of judgments that pertain to that similar object. In conclusion, yes, this is my last. In überbegriffliche Vorstellungen, Twardowski works with Meinongian concepts. He accepts, contrary to Brentano, an intermediate state between representation and judgment. He does not call it with Meinong assumption, but his oscillation between the denomination of a represented judgment and representation of a judgment, which he considers synonymous, is a further proof that it is precisely an intermediate state between the other two. Moreover, the affinities between the two notions are evident. Like assumptions, represented judgments do not claim to truth, are affirmative or negative, and play an essential role for understanding. In the late spring of 1904, Twardowski was in Graz. He did meet Meinong, but we don't know very much about this meeting. It could have been the beginning of a more robust relationship, but on the contrary, after this meeting, the relationship between Meinong and Twardowski turned into a formal relationship between colleagues. But that meaning had no sequel. But I like to imagine that at least once Meinong and Twardowski did play together, just as their philosophy tuned up in several points with each other. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I think we've got 2 or 3 minutes for discussion. So if there are any questions here in our library or online.
I have, it's not a question, but a kind of a remark. You used in many places the word subsist. And it is, I suppose it is the translation of German bestehen. I know it is an entrenched tradition of translating Meinong. But I think that the better translation would be simply obtain. Because, you know, bestehen, that is a word belonging to the ordinary German language, like obtain in English. And subsist, it suggests some medieval connotation with subsistentia, and it is extremely misleading. Because a reader imagines that.
What is interesting is that Twardowski makes this difference between existiert and besteht before Meinong. He uses this difference only for judgment. In Meinong, it becomes scriptural also for objects, for example. But the idea is that there are not only existential judgments, because judgments about the relation can also be about something which does not exist, and which, okay, we can also translate obtain. Subsist is just the traditional way to translate it.
The problem, the translatory problem will be probably with numbers, because Meinong says die Zahlen bestehen auch, nicht existieren. And to say in English, the numbers obtained isn't very natural, so that will be probably the only problem.
Thank you.
Okay. So perhaps I have one comment and one question. A comment is that this the concept of something between judgment and presentation, and namely supposition or presentation of judgment, was used among others by Władysław Witwicki in his conception of religious faith. And tomorrow we'll have a lecture about that. And as far as I know, Witwicki refers to Meinong, not to Twardowski, when he uses this conception. So that's a historical remark. And my question is a philosophical one. I don't know what you think about it. I'm thinking about the distinction between intuitive and unintuitive representations or presentations. Is the distinction strict, rough, or it is not? Because I'm very bad in intuitive presentations, but I believe that standard people can present intuitively a triangle, but I cannot present intuitively a figure with 1,000 angles. But where is the when is the end of intuitive presentations? How many angles can we present intuitively, and
according to Twardowski, we cannot make a limit, because it depends of the capacity of the subject. And if I say a pentagon and a kilogon, maybe nobody can represent a kilogon, but there are subjects which can have a stronger capacity to represent intuitively. He says also sometimes we are not interested to make this step to intuitive representation. No? You can describe an object which I don't know, and I understand your words, but I have not an image. You use the words a mental picture of it. No? In this sense, I think both Twardowski and Meinong, they are interested in the mental operation which we are doing in construct from words a representation.
So generally, it depends on the person and
the
capacity of
imagination. He takes this idea from Meinong, that the capacity of the subject is decisive in order to make this passage from non-intuitive to intuitive, and it is also not always possible to do.
Okay. Thank you for your answer, for your talk. And we are a little bit late because of these technical problems, but it's my pleasure to announce our second speaker today. It is Arkadiusz CHRUDZIMSKI from Jagiellonian University, and the title of his paper is Bocheński on Analogy.
Okay, thank you very much. My talk concerns Bocheński's analysis of analogy, and let us begin with a short reminder what the analogy is. of course, everybody knows this, but let us summarize. The idea is that beside concepts or general terms that are general in a normal or in standard way, there are some special concepts or general names that apply to various kinds of things or that express various ideas or various concepts, but not in the way in which it is characteristic for standard general terms. And the best known example is the concept of being according to Aristotle. As we know, Aristotle says that there are many categories of being, but that the word being is applicable to all these categories, but in different ways. It's not just a general concept like it wouldn't be the right picture to imagine that the word being is just general and there are various differentia specifica that make this concept into a concept which is applicable only to accidents, only to substances, only to relations, etc. The ways in which we said we predicate being on all these categories is different in every case, but the unity of these different ways is a little more complicated than the unity of general concept that can be specialized by adding differential specifica. So this is the idea, and then in scholastic philosophy, this concept of analogy was elaborated mainly for theological ends, because everything in medieval philosophy is finally directed at explaining certain theological problems. But during this explanation, many interesting philosophical and logical distinction has been made, as we all know. If we refer to this medieval theory of analogy, there are three main kinds of analogy. The analogy of proportionality. Here on the screen, you have an example which is perhaps not very fortunate, because in English, principle is of course not the point of the beginning of a spring of water. This is of course the translation of Greek word arche, which means also beginning, and that's why it looks so fishy or so strange. Then there is the analogy of attribution. The best known example is the word healthy, which is applicable to food and to persons. That a person can be healthy and the food is healthy if it contributes to the health of a healthy person. In a nutshell, and there is probably for medieval philosophers the most important analogy of imitation or participation, when we try to speak about God using our mundane concepts and words, and the idea was that they apply to God only
in an analogical way. Okay, after this introduction, let us move to Bocheński. And one remark, just right at the beginning. For Twardowski, only two first kinds of analogy would be interesting. He claims that only analogy of attribution and analogy of proportionality is really worth analyzing. For some unknown reason, he wasn't interested in this paper in the application of concepts to the person of God, and so he omits this kind of analogy. Okay, so Bocheński claims that the most natural way of analyzing the concept of analogy will use the tools of semantics, and he proposes the following picture as when we want to explain what is going on when we think about meaning, reference, and names as linguistic entities, we must distinguish four items or four elements. This is the name itself, the language in which the name functions, the content of the name, and the object. And this is N, L, C, and O in this formula. And Bocheński calls this structure semantic complex. And it is important to remember and to keep in mind that when Bocheński speaks about name, he means a concrete individual, a concrete mark on the screen or on the paper. It was a kind of obsession, I would say, in Lvov-Warsaw School to treat linguistic entities as concrete individuals, which is not going to function in the end, but everybody who investigated a little the question of language, of meaning, of what the word is, knows very well that it is a immensely complicated matter, and it cannot be fixed so easily as to claim that it is unproblematic to treat words as physical individuals, and to add a clause that some of those individuals have the same form, and that's exactly what Bocheński says. Some of these individual names are equiformal, so to speak. They obtain an isomorphy of gestalt or of form between several words, and it should be unproblematic. We know that it is very problematic. The physical shape of words can be very different, and it is all the questions of gestalt perception are involved. All problems that words are functional elements of linguistic systems, and so on and so on. So it is very complicated. Just keep in mind that this part of Bocheński's analysis is rather simplified. But okay, so to instances of the name John will be, according to Bocheński, are to be treated as two different names. And according to this approach, analogy is not a property of a word, but a relation between names. For example, when we use the word being several times, every time there is another being. It is another, and the word is analogical if there obtain a certain relation between those different names of the same form or of the same shape as Bocheński adds. Okay, so here is the notation of Bocheński. We have two semantic complexes. Like, let us imagine we have two words being, and as we treat these words as individual, we have two semantic complexes. I used indexes to make the notation perhaps more transparent. Bocheński used a little bit another notation which is even less transparent. I think it is complex enough. And we have a relation between those two complexes, and this relation contains or involves, of course, 8 terms or 8 places. And now Bocheński says that what is important as a first step is to distinguish various possibilities, how the elements of this 8 places relations stand to each other, and we will see this in the following table. Don't worry, it looks complicated, but it will turn out that only one row is really important. So we have what is important for us is the relation between 2 names, 2 languages, 2 contents, and 2 objects involved in this relation. And first of all, the name can be, the 2 names can be either isomorphic, as Bocheński says, that means of the same shape, or not. If they are not of the same shape, it is uninteresting for us. And so 8 possibilities are out of our picture right from the beginning. So the things are simplified already. And now the question of language. The language can be the same language, or there is possibility that we have to do with 2 languages. The second possibility is again not interesting for us. So we are now up with only 4 possibilities: 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they are. In the first case, the names are semantically identical, which is also not very interesting. In the second case, we have the so-called univocal names. Medieval philosophers, they had such a category. Nowadays, I think we will analyze the situation otherwise, but this is the case when you use, for example, animal to refer to a particular cat and to particular dog, etc. And in this case, according to this analysis, the content is the same and the objects are different, which is problematic but this possibility is not the one that Bocheński is going to elaborate in what follows, so we can put this aside as well. Now the third possibility is when we have the two different contents and the same object, which is similar to the case of morning star and evening star. It's only not the case that will be important for the analysis of analogy. And so what is really important is only the fourth case in which we have different contents and the same name. That means the name of names of the same shape, the same language, and different contents and different objects. So okay, so the general notion of an analogy is as follows. We have it is just a symbolic writing of or symbolic phrasing of what we have said already. We have to obtain an analogy between two semantic complex means that we have these two semantic complex and the contents are different, the objects are different, and there obtain a certain additional condition, which is to be elaborated, and this is the main point of the whole enterprise. So, what is this condition phi? Okay, this can we keep, I think, at least at the moment. And what is the case in the what is the nature of this condition in the case of the analogy of attribution? Bocheński claims that we have that in this case we have to do with some causality, like in the paradigm case of the word healthy. The food is healthy. The main meaning of healthy is this meaning that is applicable to a healthy person, and the food is healthy only because it causally contributes to the health of a healthy person, or a way of life can be healthy, etc., etc. And so we have in our analysis we have, or in Bocheński's analysis we have the same what we already saw, and in place of F we have this causal condition. And how should it be formulated? The first approach, or the first approximation, would be that the condition is there is a certain causal relation between objects of the semantic complex. But Bocheński claims it would be too simplified because he didn't say this, but we can add that it is quite possible that between every two objects in the world there is a certain causal connection. So this condition would be pretty empty. And another observation is that this causal connection must have something to do with the content. If I use the word healthy, then it is not the whole business that I refer to some pieces of food and some pieces of human beings, but what is important is that I refer to them through a certain quality of being healthy. So this content should be taken into consideration, and that's what Bocheński tries to do in this more sophisticated condition, namely that there exists a certain relation R which relates and there is a certain causal connection connecting or causal nexus connecting this 5 places structure that which means content, object of both semantic complex, and in addition to this a certain relation that should relate all these elements. Of course, it is Twardowski doesn't say anything specific about this relation and how this whole complex structure should be understood, but of course it is a beginning of an analysis, and the material or substantial claims concerning this issues only could be done within the framework of some sophisticated metaphysics of causality. This is what Bocheński tries to do is just a beginning, just a sketching a certain formal scheme. Okay, so that's what we finally get. The only interesting thing is that the last row, which contains this causal condition, speaking about causal relation. And Bocheński adds that there is also a kind of analogy of attribution that involves some middle terms. This causal connection can go through additional objects, but it's not. It's pretty obvious and perhaps not so interesting. And now we have the analogy of proportionality, and Bocheński claims that this analogy is probably the most interesting from the philosophical point of view, and we have 2 explanations according to Bocheński in the tradition. This is the explanation that appeals to the notion of isomorphy, and the explanation which he attributes to Thomas Aquinas, and another theory that operates with the notion of disjunction or alternative, which originated from Cajetan, according to Bocheński. First, he analyzes or speaks about this alternative theory. According to this alternative theory, we would have the following situation. We have one name with the content C, C1, a second name with the content C2, and what happens is that we use the name, the third name, according to Twardowski, and we would say the same name in our ordinary language, and we attribute to this name a disjunctive content. So, for example, an example would be we use the word being, and the content of this word, the meaning of the word being is either a substance or an accident or a relation or. So the content is thought of as a kind of disjunction. But Bocheński says this construal is not satisfactory because we have no explanation what is going on. Why is this concept analogical concept? We don't say anything about the connection of this contents. And if this would be the right explanation of being analogical, then any disjunctive concept would be analogical. We could take two arbitrary contents, for example, being a member of Rolling Stones and being a Gothic cathedral in Paris. And we can build the concept grooming. Grooming is either being a member of Rolling Stones or being a Gothic cathedral in Paris. And according to this explanation, this would be an analogical concept, which is pretty useless as an analysis. So Bocheński says that an interesting explanation of the concept of analogy of proportionality is the isomorphic theory, according to which what is in play is the concept of isomorphy, and he thinks that the correct explanation is that this explanation is again contained in the last row of this formula on the screen, and the idea is that we claim when we say that there is a relation of analogy of proportionality between two semantic complexes, then we claim that there are certain relation P and Q, and the object, the content and object of the first complex is related by P. The content and the object of the second complex are related by the relation Q, and there is an isomorphy between the relation P and Q. Okay, many questions can be posed concerning this analysis. Okay, one remark. Bocheński claims that the concept of analogy is relevant to contemporary logical analysis. He claims that in the theory of types we have exactly the concept of systematic ambiguity that can be analyzed by means of the concept of isomorphy and corresponds in principle to the concept of analogy, and also when we analyze, for example, the semantic concepts by means of the hierarchy of meta languages, that we have, according to Twardowski, the same situation. We have certain structural identity that can be analyzed by means of the concept of isomorphy, and which in turn corresponds to the old concept of analogy when properly understood. That means so understood in the way Bocheński wants it to be understood. And the problems are, which I mentioned at the end of the paper, are whether the isomorphy shouldn't obtain between contents, And why I think rather between contents and not between relations connecting contents with objects, and why this question or this problem, because we have empty names, and probably we would like to speak about analogy only also in the case of empty names. To mention just one case, everybody knows that God doesn't exist. So when we want to apply analogy to the problems of theology, we will be forced to apply it to the names that are empty, have only contents and no objects. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alek, for your talk. And we've got about 5 minutes for discussion. Are there any questions or comments? Venanzio would like to start.
I have a question about one of your first slides. When you wrote that according to Bocheński, the name names the content of an object. That means that according to Bocheński, we have names for content, not for object. The name sun is not the name of the object sun, but of the content.
No, it is what Bocheński is doing here is, in principle, he's taking a traditional approach or theory, and here it refers to, because it is a paper about the medieval philosophy in principle. So he uses terminology and conceptions from scholastic philosophy, and first is this idiosyncrasy with the names treated as individual objects. So it is idiosyncratical Lvov-Warsaw School. So put it aside. The second, he puts also language in this four-part structure, and interestingly enough, he has no hesitation to speak about language system, but he has some problems with treating names as types and not as tokens. It's strange. And the third item, this content, is what is something which is nowadays called intention, or intention with S, Carnapian intention, or sense, fragrance sense, or meaning. And Bocheński, in the style of scholastic philosophy, he says this content is quality, is just the best way of understanding is it is a kind of property. For example, when I use the name, the general name horse, the meaning or the content of this name is the property of being a horse, like in Carnap's meaning and necessity, more or less. And the object now, the object of this name. Bocheński doesn't say much about what is the object, and if we want to apply Carnap, we would say for the word horse, the object would be the set of all horses, or the set of all objects which exemplify the property which is the content of the name. So Bocheński, it's nothing strange about this approach of Bocheński. He applies here just the standard ways of analysis.
If he refers to the scholastic conception, does Bocheński speaks about Aristotle's De Interpretatione? Because I have in mind this chapter, no, of Aristotle's De Interpretatione.
No, he doesn't refer very specifically to. He writes something like, "Oh, I assume that everybody is well acquainted with scholastic philosophy and also with Principia Mathematica." And he writes in such a manner, for example, when he refers to these two interpretation of alternative interpretation or destructive interpretation and isomorphic interpretation of the analogy of proportionality, he writes, okay, I take or I assume that it originated in Cayetan, but there are no references, no textual evidence. But there is no need of this. It is not the work of academic historical work, but a kind of logical analysis. And if it is historically incorrect, then be that. Then let's call this pseudo Thomas and pseudo Cayetan and pseudo Middle Age.
One question is historical. There were two versions of paper of Bocheński in Polish o analogii i roczniki filozoficzne, and the second in the tomist in English. There are some difference, or it is the same?
I used only this English version from the Thomist. So I wasn't aware of the fact that there was a Polish version in Roczniki. I only knew that there is Polish translation in this book containing the papers of Bocheński, and this is the translation of the paper from the Thomist.
The second question, it is very complicated. And what do you think? What is the value of this attempt of Bocheński? What is the most?
I would say that the most interesting thing is the idea that we should really strongly rely on the notion of isomorphy. So I think this is the most important thing, and I agree that this analysis could be made much more transparent. So if you operate within the framework of one language, you could take one letter from this four element structure, and it will look already much better. And because of the fact that we operate with the names that are of the same shape, it shouldn't be also possible to speak with human language and not with Bocheński language, and to speak about two meanings of one word and not about two words with different meanings and which are related by the relation. And this way of putting the matter would be much more accessible for a reader that is educated in the way in which we are educated. So this convention of speaking of treating the names as individuals, it is something which is very confusing. Okay, and as I said at the end of my talk, I think it is a room for improvement of this analysis. We should, when we want to do this, we should reflect what is exactly the place of this isomorphy, and how to which elements of this structure should it be applied, or between what elements should it obtain? Because as I said, the assumption that we always have the objects of all these names is unrealistic.
Okay, so it's time for a break. Thank you very much once again. And we will be back in 15 minutes to continue our session. Światło, co to jest? Fale, czy...
Żeśmy tych, jak zobaczyłem, to tam, teraz to nie ma.
Hello everyone, we are back after the coffee break, and our next speaker is Stepan IVANYK from Kazimierz Twardowski Philosophical Society in Lviv, and his paper is entitled Historical and Conceptual Analysis of the English Name Lvov-Warsaw School. Stepan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Could you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Hello.
Great. So I'll share my screen. Yes.
We can see you. It's perfect. It's not a problem.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
I think that the Zoom participants can see your screen, but there is a problem here in our room in the library. One moment. Stepan, we see your email. So
Okay, and now.
And now we read.
It's quite
you can see my presentation, no?
we still see your email, so
Okay. So I will try once again.
another window, yes. Yes, it's better now.
Great.
Great.
Okay, so let's start. Good morning, dear colleagues. So the title of my presentation is Historical and Conceptual Analysis of the English name, the Lvov-Warsaw School.
But there is still one problem, because we
cannot see your presentation in the full screen mode. Maybe you should now choose another window, because we can see your PowerPoint, not.
But we may, yes, but we may see the slides that follow.
Okay, it's fine. I was worried that they won't change, but it's okay.
Okay, so please start once again. Excuse me.
Okay, and if I change the slides, can you see this change now?
Yes, we can see.
Oh, okay. So the name, English name Lvov-Warsaw School, as of today, we have a well-established tradition of using this name, but to be frankly, when I started to study the school, it was probably 15 years ago. And when I started to read English text devoted to this school, and it seemed to me that this part of the name, so the name Lvov, is very strange. It's very strange for me, but I thought to myself, since everyone is using it, I'm going to do the same. So in other words, I relied on tradition and used this term in English normally. But with each passing year, I had more and more doubts as to whether this tradition was good. So I decided that the matter should not be neglected or ignored. It should be carefully examined. And it took me several years to make a research on the matter. I also have consulted the matter with some of you. Thank you very much for your help, for your tips, for your notes. And today I would like to present you a summary of this research, and I hope I found an answer on the question whether this term is good. Okay, so let's start. I think that the issue it's worth starting with the study of general rules for the formation of names of foreign cities in English, but not only English, but in all languages. And I noticed that there are two types of foreign cities names in English and in other countries. I would call the first type domesticated names, and the second type of names copied names. When we take a look at Polish language, we have some domesticated names in Polish, like Lipsk. It's a Polish name for German city Leipzig. Kolonia is the Polish name for German city Köln, Królewec, Königsberg, Paris, New York, etc., etc. So the sense of domesticated names is the following. We have in particular language particular name for a foreign city, and this name, it doesn't matter how this name is originally spelled in a local language, let's say, yes. From the other hand, we have also such copied names of cities in Polish, like Hamburg, Magdeburg, Düsseldorf, Münster, Manchester, Nottingham, Le Châtre, etc., etc. These names are exactly copied from the original spelling of the names of the cities, even with using of letter not used in Polish language, but used in this local language. For example, this German yes, or French etc., etc. By the way, for Münster, it was also in another type of name, Monaster. It was domesticated for sure, but finally Münster won, let's say, in this competition of domesticated and copied names in Polish language. If we take a look at English, we could say that English name Warsaw is domesticated name for Polish city Warszawa. And for example, Poznań, from the other hand, is copied name for Polish city Poznań. And what about Lvov? Is it domesticated or copied? So let's check the both of possibilities. The version 1, this name, let's assume that this name, English name, is copied. But if it is copied, then copied from what? The answer most obvious for us is that it is copied from Polish Lvov, just transliterated from Lvov to Lvov, yes. In this case, Polish W should be transliterated into English V. But if we make a research how another names of Polish cities are transliterated into English, we can see that always Polish W or W is transliterated into English W, like Warsaw, Gorzów Wielkopolski, Rzeszów, Kraków, etc., etc. So this version is very unlikely from my point of view. But if not Polish name Lvov is a base for copying for English name, so what name is such a base? Let's take a look at this table. Here you can see different national versions of name for this city. So Polish Lvov, German Lemberg, French Leopold, Ukrainian Lviv, transliterated as Cyrillic into Latin as Lviv, and Russian Lvov translated into English as Latin as Lvov. And here we can see that it's obvious that English Lvov, it seems to be copied from Russian Lvov. But if so, how it could happen? How it could, the transliteration of Russian Lvov is correct from the point of view of standards, international standards of transliteration from Cyrillic into Latin. But how it is possible? How it is possible that we use in English terminology the copy of a very Russian version of the name of city? It was very interesting for me. And to answer this question, we should take a short overview, of the history of the city, because during the different periods of history, the city changed its name several times. We know that the school of Twardowski was established in 1895. It was period of Austro-Hungary. And I decided that I will check, first of all, such sources as maps of this time, English maps of this time. How is named this city in English maps from this period? And the first, the earliest English map I found, it was published in 1799, shortly after departure of Poland into three parts between different empires. The author of this map was William Faden. He was official geographer of the King of Great Britain. So it's very reliable source for me. The map was published in London. And if we take a look at the name of English name of the city, we could see two names de facto, Leopold and Lemberg. So Lemberg was more important because it was at this time German was official language on these territories. Leopold, I suppose, it was from Latin, because before Austro-Hungarian period of the city, mostly the Latin version of city was used in officially. Yes. So Lemberg was official name of the city, and it was in use to the end of its extension of Austro-Hungary. After Austro-Hungary collapsed in 1980, it was a very short period when the city was situated within the borders of Ukrainian People's Republic. I couldn't find any English map of this period, but I found a French map. It is very interesting because this map was published in Paris in 1990. It's very interesting because the name of the city changed into its Ukrainian version, Lviv, and the second Leopold is French. So we see that English name, official name of the city, changed according to the change of authorities of Lviv. We had German-speaking authorities, so we used Lemberg. After this, we have Ukrainian-speaking authorities, and after that, in English, we use the copy of Ukrainian name of city. So in this case, Lviv. But it was very short period, probably several months. From 1990 till 1939, it was period of Second Polish Republic, and I found such a map from dated 1930 English map, and of course we can see that the name of the city is copied from Polish, Lvov. The second version is Lemberg, as a reminiscence of the previous name of the city, German, yes. And you can also see that not only Lvov, but all in other cities around are copied from Polish versions, yes, Stanisławów, Skalat, Lubaczów, etc., etc. 1939, 41, 44, 91 is a period of USSR. I will miss the short period between 1941 till 1944, the period of Nazi Germany. Of course, German name of the city returned in this period, Lemberg. The map dated 1968, published in Oxford. Let's see. The name of the city. The name of the city is Lvov. So obviously it's copied from Russian name of the city, Lvov. Because the official name of the city in this period was Lvov, was Russian version, because Russian was official language on the territory of Ukraine in this period. So it's quite logical, yes. It's quite logical. And the last period, from 1991 till now, the period of Ukraine. One more time, the authorities changed, and Ukrainian became the only official language in Ukraine. And if we take a look at contemporary English maps of Ukraine, we can easily see that the name of the city is Lviv. So the copied from Ukrainian version of the name of the city. So to summarize, we can see that the English name of city changed through different period of times, several times. Yes, from beginning from 1772 from Lemberg, through Lvov, Polish Lvov, through Russian Lvov, ending contemporary name Lviv, Ukrainian version. Yes. So we can draw such the following conclusions from this research. The first conclusion: English name Lvov is copied from Russian name Lvov. The second conclusion: it refers to time period of belonging of the city to USSR. So concrete period of time, 1939, 41, and 44, from 44 till 91. But someone could say, okay, but let's wait with final conclusion, but we should also check the second option. Which states that probably English name Lvov is not a copy, but it is domesticated name, and similar to, for example, to Polish name Kolonia, Polish name of German city Köln. Why Kolonia? Because it is based on the Latin name of the city, Colonia. Yes. Probably the same situation we have also in English. Probably there is some Latin base for English name Lvov, and I remember that Professor Twardowski asked me one time. Even he gave me one idea. Probably. The Latin Lvov could derive from Old Ukrainian Lvov. Old Ukrainian was language used in Ukraine from 11th, let's say, to 15th century. And I decided to check also this hypothesis. And I started from the historical document. It is the most famous historical document from 13th century. It was Galician, so-called Galician-Volhynian Chronicle, written in Cyrillic, in Old Ukrainian language of this time. And as you know, Lvov was founded in 1254. So it's very 13th century, And yes, indeed, in the text of this chronicle, I found that we can find some mentions of the city, and it's spelled in Old Ukrainian Cyrillic like Lvov. So very close to the modern spelling of the name of city in modern Russian language, yes. But not only Lvov. I noticed also that every time this name Lvov is like preceded by another name, Gorod. Gorod means city. So the name de facto was complex. Yes, it consisted with two parts. First part Gorod, city, and second part Lvov, the city of Leo. Leo was the king who founded the city. So we could have two possibilities of transliteration, let's say, of this name from Old Ukrainian to Latin. The first option is transliteration, literal transliteration. If we take only second part of this name, Lvov, yes, it could be transliterated into Latin as Lvov. But it's very unlikely that historically this method should be used, because Lvov means it's like incomplete name. It means of Leo, yes. So it's used in possessive cases. Name is used in possessive case. We can use this only this one part of the name in Ukrainian and Polish, but it's impossible to imagine that this name could be used in such a way in Latin. And we have also another way of transliteration, let's say, of this name from Old Ukrainian to Leopolis. If we took the entire whole complex name, Gorod Lvov, the city of Lvov, and if we translate its meaning into Latin, it will be Leopolis, so the city of Leo. And in such a case, it makes sense. And if we check all the official documents from 13th century till 18th century, we could easily see that this second way was used. So this first version, unfortunately, we cannot prove that it had a place, but only this second methodology. And you can see here one of the pictures of medieval pictures of Lviv. Probably this picture was derived from 15th or 16th century. A lot of maps of this time with the city, and in every of the maps, the version Leopolis is used. I couldn't find any example of using version Lvov. This map is very interesting because we can see here three names of the city: Lemberg, German version, Lviv, Polish version, and Leopolis, Latin version. So three versions at the same time, yes. Please note that the land of which Lvov was a capital, Leopolis was the capital, was Russia, yes. It was not Russia, but Russia. Russia is old Ukrainian, old name for Ukraine, yes. So it's just a small remark. A lot of official text literature, in all of them also Leopolis is used. Leopolis was the official name for the city beginning from 13th century to the end of 18th century for sure. So what conclusions from this? English name Lvov is not domesticated, it is copied. And we can also repeat the previous conclusions. English name Lvov is copied from Russian name Lvov, and it refers to the period belonging to the city to USSR. But The next question is, why was name Lvov used in name the Lvov-Warsaw School? It was very interesting for me, and I started from the question, when did it happen for the first time? And I found that for the first time, this name was used by Professor Bocheński in the articles Lvov-Warsaw School at the Vienna Cycle only in 1989. So not so old tradition. As for me, it was surprising for me that I saw that this tradition established immediately after the Second World War, but not only in 1989 was the first mention of this, first using of this name. And in 1989, this using could be justified, because we can interpret the name Lvov-Warsaw School used in this time as school which existed in Warsaw and city called now Lvov, because Lvov was official name of this city in this time. That's true. But if we agree with this justification, we could also state that since 1991, when the official name of city changed, this formula does not work, as the city has changed its name into Lviv. But unfortunately, it seems to me that Polish philosophers overlook this fact, not only Polish, but all philosophers all over the world, including also Ukrainian philosophers. Ukrainian philosophers at all didn't pay attention to what English name of the school is used, but not only the school, but only all Ukrainian cities are used all over the world in English. And yes, it was the fault of the state, of the Ukrainian state mostly. I could say that even in 2018, Ukrainian embassy insisted to change the Russian copies of English names in shopping airports in Warsaw. So I took this picture from the article when the Ukrainian ambassador in Poland, Andriy Deshchitsa, exposing after this the change of official names of Ukrainian cities in Warsaw Airport, including also capital, because before this change, the name Kiev, so the Russian version of the city was used. So after 2018, it changed into Kyiv, Ukrainian version. So it could be stated that probably the Lviv-Warsaw School is a proper version, English version for this notion. But my answer is not, because from my point of view, all English names of the city contain hidden temporal functors. Let's imagine that we have some meta name of the city, irrelevant to the different time periods of its existence. Let's indicate this meta name as L, and in this case, all particular names relevant to the particular time periods could be indicated as LT1, LT2, etc., etc. In this case, we could define Lemberg as L in period of time from 1772 till 1918, and the same case with Lvov, and Lviv. From this assumption, we could draw the conclusion that both names, the Lvov-Warsaw School and the Lviv-Warsaw School, are not acceptable because they are misleading. Their content is not appropriate to the meaning we are to express. Yes, but I should also say that they not have an appropriate content, but they are no content at all, because these names are de facto empty. And as they are empty, as it's not good to use them in science text, because if you know, if you use empty names in judgments, it leads that these judgments are not truth. Yes, they are false. So this using of this name leads to the multiplying of false judgment in science. It's not good. I think that the name the Lvov-Warsaw School is the most appropriate for using, and this idea is not new, because when I checked the English text from the beginning of 20th century, it turned out that beginning from 1936, the very name Lvov was used in the context of School of Twardowski. For example, the first mention of the school I found in the article of Ernest Nagel, Impressions and Appraisals of Analytic Philosophy in Ukraine. These impressions were published after Nagel visited Poland, and he had a lot of conversations with the representatives of the School of Twardowski. Another example, 1945, the book of Professor Zbigniew Jordan, we could see that the very name Lvov-Warsaw School is used here. In 1967, Professor Henryk Skolimowski, the book Polish Analytical Philosophy, the same case, Lvov-Warsaw School. And in other examples, Peter Simons, 2002, Lvov-Warsaw School. Professor Bocheński, 1985, so 4 years before he used Lvov-Warsaw School, he was using Lvov-Warsaw School. The same Bednarz Cohen, and very interesting name is used here by Professor Kiania Placek, Lemberg-Warsaw School. I think that it's could be also useful to look how another scientific schools founded in Lvov are named in English literature. Because, for example, a very famous mathematical school based in the city existed. And if we check the spelling of name of the school in English literature, we could easily see that the Lvov School of Mathematics is used. It's not only version of this name, but it dominates for obviously. And you can also see that this is title of article written by Polish and Ukrainian authors. Mikhail Zizny is very famous Ukrainian mathematician. He lives now in Lviv, and he is also the member of the Philosophical Society of Lviv, named by Twardowski. So mathematicians use Lvov School of Mathematics. I think it's a good example also for us, for philosophers, to follow this tradition. To be strict, we should use the name the Lemberg-Lvov-Warsaw School in this case, because school was founded in 1895, and this time Lemberg was the official name of the city. But it's very inconvenient. It's very inconvenient, yes. And therefore, I propose to use the name Lemberg School, but only for period of time from beginning from 1895 and ending in 1980, and to use the name Lvov-Warsaw School to the full period of extension of school, at least in Lviv, because there are different theories whether school lasted his extension after Second World War, but if even lasted, it lasted only in Warsaw, not in Lviv. So my proposal is to to resign from using the term Lvov-Warsaw School in English and to change the name Lvov into name Lviv. It is a very small change. It's a case of change only one letter, so letter V into V, but it's very small change visible, but it's very huge change in the meaning of this concept. So this is the result of my research, and I will be grateful, you colleagues, if you probably see something I could overlooked, or probably you have another ideas from on this matter. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excuse me, Professor Brożek, you are muted. We cannot hear you online.
Hello?
A political problem, not other. For example, I don't understand why you spell this original Russian or Ukrainian name Lvov by L-W-V-O-V, but not L-W-O-W. Equally natural in Russian, for example. Anyway, I have no objections against changing. However, I think it wouldn't be accepted by Western people. There are some conventions of, look, Krakowi is V, not W. We have own Polish spelling Monachium, not Minik, and so on. So there are some conventions concerning geographic names. And I understand the reasons that the Ukrainians don't like to use Russian names. Okay. In Polish is similar, in my opinion, stupid. The custom to say Auschwitz, not Auschwitz. It was Polish name, and the place didn't change. German called it Auschwitz, but the place was the same, and until, I don't remember, 70s or even later, Auschwitz was not used. It was not nothing wrong. So of course your investigation is interesting, geographical and so on, but I think that using Polish diacritical signs in English names is, in my opinion, artificial. Okay, Lvov-Warsaw School, but nobody proposes Kraków. It's Kraków. So this is a convention, a custom. As far as I remember, I was motivated by using geographic names in ordinary English. And people who consulted English, consulted my book, didn't complain. And others did the same also about Lvov.
Okay, so I will repeat my remark because I was muted. Stepan, we heard that your daughter would like to join us because we heard her crying, so she's perhaps has something important.
Sorry for that, but I cannot avoid her.
And well, was just one remark, and then I know that Violetta would also like to add something. Well, the problem is practical. I have I have a name, surname with a Polish sign, and I know how difficult it is in searching databases and so on in internet. If we use Polish signs in the name of the school, it will be just difficult to find sources and so on, because people all around the world just don't use these signs, okay? So that would be a problem, that's just practical problem to use this name in this form. Okay, and please, last question, because we are in this session.
Dzień dobry Państwu. No, temat naprawdę bardzo trudny. Miałabym dużo do powiedzenia, dlatego że w języku francuskim problem też jest obecny i przez ostatnie miesiące, bym powiedziała, robi się jeszcze bardziej trudny i dotyczy nie tylko szkoły lwowsko-warszawskiej, co jest jeszcze, powiedziałabym, możliwe do, że tak powiem, decyzji wspólnej środowiska naukowego na ten temat i różne aspekty mogą w tym wziąć udział, aby to zadecydować, ale jest po prostu faktem jest, że w tej chwili w języku francuskim w związku z wojną właściwie całkowicie słowo Lviv zastąpiło francuskie słowa na określenie tego miasta. I w związku z tym no, problem toponimów, który jest w ogóle problemem trudnym, tak jak Pan to we wstępie przedstawił, jest w tej chwili rzeczywiście problemem, który powoduje nawet pewne reakcje w prasie i moim zdaniem, ale to tak tylko bardzo szybko, jako jedyny polityczny aspekt tej sprawy, wręcz narzucanie, przepraszam, że to tak powiem, ale przez walczących bohatersko Ukraińców słowa Lviv dla miasta, które po francusku się zawsze nazywało albo Lwów, albo Leopold przez ostatni wiek, z czasem może mieć wręcz odwrotny efekt w opinii publicznej. No ale to inny temat i to mieć. Ze względu na to, że naprawdę studiowałam i to długo sprawę używania w języku francuskim tego toponimu, mam zastrzeżenia po pierwsze do Pana metodologii. To znaczy na każdy argument, który Pan podał, mogę Panu od ręki w tej chwili z materiałów, które mam już zebrane, dać po prostu 10, 20, 50 kontrargumentów. Od XX wieku jest całkowity bałagan, jeśli chodzi o toponim Lwów, Lwow, Lwiv, Leopold. Jest to związane z historią tego miasta w tym czasie i z geopolityczną historią Europy w tym czasie. Dlatego wydaje mi się, że pierwszym i podstawowym argumentem, który powinno się uwzględnić w dyskusji na ten temat, to jest sprawa poszczególnych języków. Języki mają swoje korpusy, języki mają swoje, po francusku się nazywa trésor de la langue, nie wiem, czy po polsku w lingwistyce używa się słowo skarb języka, ale trésor po francusku w lingwistyce oznacza całość istniejących słów uznanych za słowa tego języka. I w języku francuskim, podobnie jak w języku angielskim, od początku XX wieku istnieją dwa słowa. To jest Leopold i Lwow. Słowo Lwow uzurpowało właściwie swoją obecność. To zostało spowodowane przez fakt, tak jak Pan to zauważył, że od momentu, gdy Polska została, pierwszy rozbiór nastąpił, miasto stało się miastem austriackim, habsburskim i natychmiast gazetka, która była wydawana w Lwowie, była wydawana już nie po polsku, tylko po francusku i nazywała się Gazette de Leopold. Tak?
Pani Violetto, my niestety musimy kończyć, ponieważ musimy się trzymać tutaj naszego...
Rozumiem, to tylko bardzo szybko powiem. Trzeba rozróżnić z pierwszej strony respektować język, w którym się mówi na ten temat, a druga rzecz, respektować przedmiot, o którym się mówi. W wypadku Szkoły Lwowsko-Warszawskiej mamy do czynienia z międzynarodową dziedziną badań. I ta międzynarodowa dziedzina badań, nazwana Szkoła Lwowsko-Warszawska, École Lvov-Warsaw School, ma swoją tradycje, ma swoje konwencje związane między innymi z tłumaczeniami, z czego wynika też mnóstwo praktycznych aspektów. Natomiast mimo wszystko, i niezależnie od tej strony czysto historiozoficznej i historycznej nauki, jest po prostu sprawa dobrego sensu, z takiego wyczucia sensu. To znaczy jest absurdalne powiedzieć, że ostatni cesarz rzymski zmarł na murach Istambułu. On zmarł na murach Konstantynopola. Podobnie szkoła lwowsko-warszawska w tym najściślejszym określeniu skończyła się w 1939 roku. Miasto nazywało się wtedy Lwów i nazywanie go Lviv, nazywanie tej szkoły Lviv jest nieduże.
To nie jest postulat Stepana. Stepan, jeszcze raz powtórzmy, postuluje, żeby używać właśnie polskiej nazwy. Dobrze, thank you very much. I knew that your paper, Stepan, would provoke so many emotions as usually your papers provoke. So thank you once again really for your talk.
Thank you very much. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. And our last talk in this session is a paper by Marcin BŁDKOWSKI from University of Warsaw, and his title is Höfler, Stebbing, Twardowski, the Historical Roots of Pragmatic Logic.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and also for having me here. I really do apologize that I cannot participate in the whole conference in all sessions, but it's due to some schedule conflicts and also due to family issues. I really regret I cannot participate in all sessions, but still anyway, thank you. Today I'm going to say something, say a few words about the historical roots of pragmatic logic. I would like to mention especially Höfler, Stebbing, and Twardowski. And I have divided my talk into two parts, two main parts. The first one being concept and history of pragmatic logic. I would like to outline indicate several well-known and maybe less known parts, I hope. And then to compare pragmatic logic with the methodological postulates of the Lvov-Warsaw School. And in the second part, I would like to discuss main threads or directions or branches of influence, namely between Höfler and Twardowski, then Twardowski, Höfler, and Ajdukiewicz, and influence of Susan Stebbing on Ajdukiewicz. And then in the last part, in conclusions, I would like to sum up and to tell you about my plans for the future. So starting with the concept of pragmatic logic, I'm pretty sure that you know that there is a textbook written by Ajdukiewicz, and it was published in 1964 after Ajdukewicz's death. And it was an updated version of his previous textbook titled Logical Basis of Didactics, Logical Foundations of Didactics, which of course translated in different ways. And he also known about other textbooks because they, as it was told, they influenced whole generations. For example, elements by Twardowski or elements by Bocheński, published in 1929. But maybe less known fact is that Ajdukiewicz for whole his life was working on the textbook in elementary logic. We can find such statements, and a lot of his studies were subordinated to this task. So, for example, we can take some articles by Ajdukiewicz and found very similar topics, very similar issues in these papers. And when it comes to elements by Twardowski and Ajdukiewicz, you may not know that there was a heated discussion between Twardowski and Bocheński in 1924 and 1925. There was a distinction between bad and good logic, and to put it very shortly, here you can see a quote from Twardowski. A stylish, so to say, contemporary logician sees around himself two logics, one philosophical, that is bad, and the other one mathematical, that is good. Since symbolic logic is the only true logic and the only logic, it should reign along in all the institutions devoted to logic. This confusion never uttered in all its brightness seeps through words and actions. And also, there is an anecdote that Leśniewski used to say that the discipline he practices is called logika, pronounced with an accent on the vowel O, whereas logika, as the name of philosophical logic practiced by Twardowski, should be accented with the vowel I. There is also another distinction proposed by Twardowski, that we can think about logic in two different ways. We can see it more like mathematics or more like epistemology. This the latter way is the way Twardowski is offered, is adopted. And when it comes to the term pragmatic logic, it was used by Arkadiusz, of course, in the title of his text, but there were many other names, for example, philosophical logic, general logic, school logic, logic in a school sense, pedagogical logic, and it was described in many articles. You can see here some of them by Twardowski in the education. Also, there were some published by CHRUDZIMSKI. And in these papers, we can find many details on the curriculum of logic, some discussions what parts of logic should be taught for teachers in elementary schools and so on. But I think it's valuable to think about it as one main, so to say, movement. Yes, called pragmatic logic with some different versions. I don't want to discuss elements of the curriculum of pragmatic logic, but I would like to offer some very general approach that it can be defined in very different ways. But we have methodological postulates that were related and taken in the Lvov-Warsaw School. You certainly know that Twardowski defined his school regarding this formal postulates. So, for example, there is a famous quote that the main characteristic of this school is in the formal methodological domain. It's based on striving for the greatest possible precision and accuracy in thinking and expressing one's thoughts, as well as one of the most exhaustive justification of what is said and the correctness of it. And many representatives of the Lvov-Warsaw School, for example, Twardowski, also adopted this view. They shared the postulates of clarity and justification. These were the main postulates, but we also can find other, for example, the postulate of diligent exchange of thoughts. For example, we could say that the art of discussion is part of pragmatic logic, and also the postulate of good work. So, for example, some elements of psychology or mental techniques of mental work, very practical courses also could be treated as a part of the curriculum of pragmatic logic. But I don't want to stop and to discuss all these very interesting elements. Today I would like only to mention 3 points, 3 sources of influence on the program of pragmatic logic. And I would like to show you some references that you can find in Byczkowski's textbook, Logical Foundations of Teaching, Logical Foundations in Pragmatics. So you can see that there is Twardowski's basic principle of didactics and logic, published in 1981. There are, of course, also other papers like Jagiellonian, like Twardowski, like Stepan, but there are also textbooks by easy Susan Stebbing and also allows Höfler logical techniques. So now let's move on to the impact of Höfler on Twardowski. Höfler was Twardowski's teacher. He was strongly influenced by Meinong. He was an important link between the Lvov-Warsaw School and the Venanzio. And from 1881 to 1903, he taught mathematics, physics, and philosophical apologetics at the grammar school of the Present Academy in Vienna. And in 1890, he published a textbook in logic reading with Meinong. Some main features of this textbook are as follows. It was seen as written from the psychological perspective. Today, maybe we could say from the disciplinary perspective. For example, its first part is titled Psychological Introduction to Logic, and also in other parts devoted to concepts, to judgments, to methods of the sciences. You can find some subchapters like psychological origins of concepts, and also psychological properties of judgments. Of course, it also embraces many elements of logic, but still it is accompanied with elements of psychology, making this very interesting. And what is important, I think, in this historical context, that Twardowski's habilitation thesis was, as Twardowski himself, then at the development of one of the sections of this particular textbook. It was section number 6. As Twardowski recalls in his autobiography, in the work I set myself the task of referring to a certain statement of logic published by Höfler with the participation of Meinong. To carry out a detailed separation of the content of the presentation from the object of presentation and to consider their mutual relationship. It also influenced Bocheński, who appreciated its value despite the psychological nature of the work. And in fact, Bocheński's presentation is this analysis of the construction of the concept of cause is appalling. There is a first introductory methodological part, and is meant as a polemic with Höfler's psychologism. Kazimierz developed his anti-psychological account of concepts there, and he tries to show what does it mean to analyze the concept. And another fact is that it was Twardowski who recommended Höfler's textbook to Kazimierz. You can find some recollections in Kazimierz's diaries that even before transferring to philosophy, I paid Twardowski a visit at his home, asking for advice on how should I begin my studies. Twardowski then recommended to me a German school of textbook on logic written by Meinong and Höfler. So, as you can see, it was a textbook that Twardowski used to recommend his disciples, and among others to Bocheński. The impact of these two authors on IVANYK, I think, is very big. We can speak about Twardowski's resonance in the Lvov-Warsaw School, and there are three main topics. For example, the idea of general logical education, then goes to the concept of logical culture. There is approach of moderate anti-formalism in logic, also can be seen as Twardowski's influence, and also that Twardowski developed pragmatic account in logic, and the core elements of curriculum are very defined by Twardowski. And in Twardowski's basic concept of didactics and logic, using teacher seminaries and private teaching, is the full title of this textbook. You can find a very similar structure to Höfler's logic. Of course, there are some extensive additional sections prepared by Twardowski, for example, considering teaching in the school, but also there are some even more authorial and original elements, such as, for example, the concept of analysis. In Arkadiusz's textbook, you can find some similarities and resemblance with Twardowski's textbook. For example, he discusses the relation between didactics and logic. Arkadiusz almost repeats the line of Twardowski's reasoning, with some modifications concerning the definitions, adopted definitions of logic, of didactics, and so on. So, for example, in the Twardowski's case, we can see that he defines logic as a science about the truthfulness of judgments. Then he states that didactics teaches how a teacher should act when, on the one hand, he gives a student information, and on the other, trains his intellectual abilities. And he says that to possess knowledge about a subject is a much more as to be able to make judgments about it. And the training of intellectual abilities is making a student capable of expressing two judgments on his own. So, if you want to teach well, you also need to familiarize yourself with it. Arkadiusz starts with some different definitions, but the conclusion is very similar. In order to be a good teacher, that is to teach students effectively, it's not enough to be able to perform activities in the subject of teaching efficiently by oneself. One must also have a theoretical knowledge on these activities. One must know the theory. So it's very similar conclusion, although the definitions of logic, of methodology, of didactics are quite different, really from the perspective maybe more focused on process than on the result, as in the case of Twardowski. Can I ask how much time you have?
Finish your talk in 15 minutes, we probably will leave some time for discussion.
Sure. So I can take 5 or 10 minutes. In Meinong's logical foundations of teaching, you can also find some original elements. For example, he develops his own account considering the theory of language and meaning, theory of questions, classification of scientific disciplines, and for example, methods of the humanities. And it's very interesting that what you can find in this textbook is several terminological distinctions, including psychological meaning, linguistic meaning, connotation, content of the name, content of the concept, complete content, characteristic content, constitutive content, pronastic content, etc. What's important that he resigned, he abandoned these categories later in his later papers, for example, in textbooks in logic, the outline of logical pragmatic logic. But it seems that in this very textbook, he tried to present an account of the relationship between content and meaning, which could be treated as a fully grounded and precise development of Twardowski's views, but still he tried to tie it up to clear or to reconcile different parties, and that is Bocheński and Twardowski. Twardowski's Höfler's psychological approach and Bocheński's anti-psychological one. So he, for example, adopts the category of connotation, but also in other papers he criticized the theory of connotation as the theory of meaning. Connotation, as he states, is not a meaning of a name, it's a linguistic or characteristic content of a name. We can see that there is a very complex terminological framework, then abandoned, but it's important because in textbook you can find a really major attempt at reconciliation of different approaches. So the last one is the influence of Stebbing on Arkadiusz, maybe the most surprising one. It was Professor Arkadiusz who recommended me to check if there are some connections. As you can see, Stebbing was mentioned in the references in this textbook, so this will try. Susan Stebbing was a British philosopher, of course. She was influenced mostly by Moore, and she played a major role in introducing logical positivism into Britain. She was a leading figure in British philosophy between the First and Second World War. She was also the founder of the journal Analysis. She was the author of several very popular textbooks in logic. For example, A Modern Introduction to Logic, published in 1930. It was the textbook mentioned by BŁDKOWSKI. And also, she also wrote Logic in Practice, Thinking to Some Purpose, for modern elementary logic. And what is interesting is, for example, her very narrative style. She makes lots of references to everyday experience. She also included very comprehensive exposition of many ideas, both syllogistic and Russell's theory of description. So she presents, so to say, the state of the art of contemporary logic. And she also makes a lot of historical references, really interesting. And in fact, it's not obvious how it influenced IVANYK. I couldn't find any passages taken directly from her textbook, but there are some candidates that we could discuss. Probably we could see this direct influence in some parts concerned with language, categories of notation and denotation. There is also a great presentation of Niels canons, which were then also discussed by BŁDKOWSKI. There are other chapters, for example, influence and implication of experimental and historical sciences that could be somehow treated as an inspiration for pragmatic logic, especially for BŁDKOWSKI textbooks. And to give you more impression of how does this text look like, you can find some parts concerning logic and mathematics, so very technical ones, and there are also parts like reflective thinking in ordinary life, or persuasion and conviction that are rather concerning everyday issues. But still, for example, we have also statistical methods and measurement discussed. The measurement was introduced in the pragmatic logic. So, I don't have much time, but the general idea is that it is quite impressive textbook, as I said. It's written in a good style, it's very comprehensive. It looks like kind of synthesis of logical knowledge, sumological, so to say. And I think it could be a kind of inspiration for some ideas of BŁDKOWSKI. Maybe this reference serves as a kind of bookmark for him, because pragmatic logic is, of course, a updated version of logical foundations of teaching. Okay, to sum. Pragmatic logic, as I was trying to convince you, should be concerned as an interdisciplinary domain defined by forming the methodological postulate of the Lvov-Warsaw School. It should be more like epistemology than logic. Of course, it's an open project, ready for updates and different kinds of authorizations. But what's really important in the historical context as well as some influences are concerned is that it seems that Höfler offered a general structure and psychological disciplinary approach to logic. Twardowski was focused on teaching in school the Stebbing. I think that what was taken by which could be seen, for example, in this modern take on the theory of induction. And education himself, he offered assimilation and transposition in the state development of original issues. One of my conclusions is that logic, the textbooks in logic are an interesting subject of research. They are, of course, somehow ignored, somehow neglected by the main research line. Of course, we know why, but I think that we really find their valuable insight on the past. And just to share some plans for the future with you, I think that it could be valuable to adopt some more systematic approach to study relations between textbooks by different authors. I will try to employ the methods of so-called computational linguistics, natural language processing and analyze textbooks to visualize the results, the flow of some categories. These methods, for example, allow us to search for some topics and categories. They allow us to extract the terminology, to find in a semi or fully automated way definitions or theses, and then compare them automatically. And it would be useful to track the flow of categories. For example, occurrences of such terms as pseudo-definition, connotation, nominal, and real definitions. Of course, their presence or their absence. Yes, it will be somehow meaningful. Or other categories like examples, moment, continuing star, present, and so on and so on. So I hope that maybe next year I will have this opportunity to show you something prepared in a large scale, so to say. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Marcin, and we've got a few minutes for discussion.
I see that for Arkadiusz and final result, in pragmatic logic, very important was the idea of pragmatic methodology. It's developed in many papers, but particularly two: meta-science, methodology of meta-science, and the axiomatic system from methodological point of view. I think that it was his very, very original approach. And also he not only discovered, of course, but renewed in the sense Twardowski's distinction of act and product. Because this pragmatic logic was logic of acts rather than products.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bocheński. Yes, I did have time to also introduce the paper from 1952 called the issue of the research plan in the field of logic. There are some topics indicated what to be undertaken in the future. For example, of course, understanding methodology or these processual aspects of the science, of the sciences. Yes. Thank you so much.
Venanzio and then.
I have just a little remark. I think that Höfler was not Twardowski's teacher, because in the Selbstdarstellung was that he had as teacher Friedrich R. And that he heard the other schoolmates to speak about the lessons about logic and psychology which were given by Höfler. But Höfler was not his teacher. He became friends of Höfler during the time when the Philosophical Society was founded.
Yes, that's right. Höfler was a teacher in Venanzio, but Twardowski didn't attend Höfler's.
He writes it. I have here the text which was edited by Professor Bocheński, and he says, jedenfalls hörte ich nicht ohne einen gewissen Neid meinen Stadtkameraden von dem Logik- und Psychologieunterricht erzählen, welchen Ihnen ein anderer lehrt, nämlich Höfler, in nächster anregender Weise teilt.
A kind of oversimplification from it. Yeah, I remember that they had they rewrite. Yes, sure, I believe you. I remember that it was kind of oversimplification, but still the voices. Twardowski knew this textbook. He recommended it to Kazimierz. He had a relation, friendship, of course, with Höfler, and they collaborate in societies. Yeah, so the point where I was simplifying was that he was a direct teacher.
One small question. You didn't mention about book Edukiewicz, Elementy Metodologii and Logiki Formalnej from 28, yes. I think that it was very important book because pragmatic logic is standard to this book in many questions. For example, theory of subjective probability, and if we can think about pragmatic logic, we must turn back to these elements.
Thank you. One thing, you know, in Polish courses of mathematical logic for students of mathematics and physics was a special topic, methodology of deductive sciences. The last lecture, it is in original Łukasiewicz book. Lubecki cancelled this section from Polish edition of 58. However, in Jaśkowski's lecture note from, I think, 48 or 47 is also such a section. So this idea of methodology was very deeply rooted in Polish courses, contrary to many books by Western logicians. For example, Church or Quine has nothing to do with such books.
That reminds me about Leśniewski, who one of his first papers concerning the principle of contradiction. In the final paragraph, he states, so we should change textbooks in order to develop the proper logical culture in our students. So they definitely see it as a task to be transferred from the papers to textbooks and to classes.
One short question from me. Did you compare Stebbing's textbook to the contemporary textbooks which are popular in Anglo-Saxon world? Are there any similarities? Do they refer to Stebbing or not?
I'm not sure, frankly speaking. I'm pretty sure that these modern textbooks rather feel the connection with 1960s and not the times before the Second World War. So I rather look for inspiration from this period, and in fact you can find rather such mentions. But you know, it's a kind of educated guess. I didn't prepare any large-scale study of that, but I had an impression that it's rather this period that we're referring to as an inspiration.
And just curious, because Edukiewiczian tradition is quite important in Poland all the time, and new textbooks often refer to the style of Edukiewicz writings and his way of putting these problems. And I'm curious whether in Anglo-Saxon world this style of work of Stebbing is.
I remember one entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that Stebbing is treated as an inspiration for pragmatic linguistics, and for example, critical discourse analysis. It's computational study dealing with big corpora of texts and trying to find some signs of language overuse or some power categories used in text, but it's a pragmatic approach, but from different branches.
Thank you once again. Okay, but a short one because we are.
Short question. Have you found any references in Stebbing about mathematical practices of the day of the turn of 20th century algebra? Because there was general algebra written Sylvester and so on.
Yes,
so the mathematical practice of this kind was made.
They were also in Stebbing's textbook, yes, and also in education. Yes, in both.
Thank you once again. And that's the end of the first session today. And we will meet back at 2:30. Bye. And for now, it's now time for lunch, and the lunch is served on the third floor of the library, so we might just take lift to the third floor. And my proposal is to take once more a picture. We got one picture on the first day, but today there are different people with us. So let's take the picture with representatives of the Lvov-Warsaw School, or Lvov-Warsaw School, as Stepan would, or Lemberg-Warsaw School, as Stepan would suggest, on this bridge, okay, with philosophers, with the columnade, and then we may have lunch in the foyer.